I appreciate the introduction. I worked with Tim a while ago, and we used to go visit customer sites, and I took a role where I don't have to travel as much, and I get to work with good people like Dinakar. And I'm excited today to talk a little bit about Azure Arc enabled data services and how it fits into our overall strategy with Azure Arc. So we're going to introduce what Azure Arc is, what problem it's trying to solve, and what solution it offers to the problems you have, and how data services fits into our Azure Arc model. And we should have plenty of time for questions at the end. So thanks. I've asked Dinakar if he would be so kind as to just help me monitor the chat and threads, and feel free to interrupt. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, excellent. I was just saying that's good. That's good, Dinakar, yep, that you're going to monitor for questions. Yes.
Yep. So feel free to pop questions in, and I may ask Dinakar some questions as well. So we'll see how this goes. So as our customers, if we found, are managing a massive footprint, and the footprint is continuing to grow. There's a blogger that many of us follow, Brent Ozar, and he posted a blog post recently about sprawl 2.0 and the next 10 years of database sprawl, how we're going to see continuing growth of databases and data, and where it goes and where it lands. We have hundreds and thousands of applications kindly developed by a broad array of developers in the open source community and developing on specific platforms. Our management and the innovators in the companies we support come in with brilliant ideas and handy solutions, and it just keeps growing the applications that we're supporting all the time. In addition, our infrastructure is complicated. I think we're doing better than we were a decade ago. We have fewer servers running under desktops, but we still have data centers in various places. We have contracted hosters. We may have merged with other organizations, so we have multiple legacy solutions that we're bringing together. We have little devices that now carry databases out on the edge on the Internet of Things, and we're still responsible for them. Those of us who are still filling the role of database administrator or database architect get to find out about things after people have problems, and we find out how to solve them and run them, and it's very diverse. In addition, there's a multitude of cloud providers out there, and the cloud providers are offering a rich service with the elasticity of the cloud and the pay for what you use, and some automated high availability and various solutions. But everyone's tools are a little bit different, and the way you manage them are a little bit different. And it's very difficult to get a consolidated view of what your environment is doing and what the current state is, and things surprise us. So how do we solve that? Well, Azure Arc is built from the ground up, and it introduces, Azure Arc is built from the ground up to embrace the hybrid scenario. And what it introduces is this single control plane. And the control plane is command line interfaces and portal experiences where all of the objects that you're managing, you can actually view in Azure, you can see the state, and you can gather the amount of reporting you want. In addition, there's integration that allows you to have the Azure experience without putting anything into our cloud if you want to, through an Azure Stack on premises, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So for the hybrid experience, Azure Arc brings the single control plane, and you can put your your resources that you need to enroll in Azure Arc, you can put those on absolutely any infrastructure. And then in addition to the cloud provider type infrastructures, you could also put a hyper-converged infrastructure, Azure Stack HCI, in your own data center so that you have Azure right then and there. You can also extend and push your internet, your management experience out to the edge and include your Internet of Things. So Azure Arc has a management and operation piece for your infrastructure. All of that happens from within the Azure control plane, and you run the Azure services on the infrastructure that you choose. So maybe you're already in a different cloud provider and you have some things on premises. Well, Azure Arc lets you manage those as a holistic entity from one place. Um, the infrastructure lets you connect and operate hybrid resources as if they're native resources. And you can also deploy and run services from outside of Azure while still operating within Azure. So what is currently available as far as infrastructure? You have your on-premises infrastructure. You have servers on premises that you are responsible for or may be responsible for. Those services right now you can install an agent on and enroll that agent in Azure and then render that and manage that server from the Azure control plane. Those servers can be of a variety of operating systems and platforms, and they can be running in any location, and you can manage those through Azure. Your SQL Server instances can also be managed through Azure Arc. It's a public preview feature. You install an agent on your SQL Server instance or on the computer that hosts your SQL Server instance. You run a script and you enroll your SQL Server instance in Azure Arc, and then you can manage that SQL Server instance with all of your other SQL Server instances that are enrolled from the Arc control plane. You get the governance and security, and you get a consistent management experience across all those instances of SQL Server. Finally, we've enabled and it's currently general availability management for your Kubernetes infrastructure, where you get a similar experience where you can manage your Kubernetes infrastructure. You can run your resources in Kubernetes, know the state of your Kubernetes cluster, and get the management experience from Azure. So that's publicly available now, and the only thing on this slide that's currently in public preview is the Arc-enabled SQL Server. So then, Arc-enabled data services. Data services is our cloud-provided SQL Server solutions, and Azure SQL Managed Instance brings a cloud-enabled experience that's very close to an on-premises instance of SQL Server, but we manage it. It's a PaaS offering of SQL Server. You can run these in Azure, of course, but with Arc-enabled data services, you can run these on your own hardware on a Kubernetes cluster, and you get all the benefits. You get elasticity. We automate the upgrade, so your SQL Server version is always current. We automate the high availability, so you basically get a behind-the-scenes availability group. You can deploy in seconds. You can scale up or scale out, and you can automate it. You can script your deployment into a Git repository as a YAML manifest, and with CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous delivery, you can have your resources automatically allocated to the appropriate node in your hardware and have all of that, all of the governance that comes with scripted manifested deployments just checked in and checked out and managed from a repository. So you get this unified management experience, you get a consistent workflow. It enables the DBA to have a business requirement. Oh, I need SQL Server here, or I need SQL Server for this purpose. You spec out what that SQL Server has to be, the amount of cores in the memory and what you want. You check that into a Git repository, and then the Arc-enabled data services builds the data solution and returns an endpoint. You give the endpoint to the requester, and your data services is up and running. So how is this built? We're going to kind of walk through all the parts. We start with any infrastructure. The infrastructure can be on Azure. In the demo I have today, my infrastructure is built on Azure. In reality, if all of your stuff is on Azure, you may not need Arc-enabled data services. But Arc-enabled data services enables a unified experience when you're hybrid and have to be in more than one place and keep running. So we can run on any infrastructure. And on that infrastructure, the first thing we have to add is a Kubernetes cluster. There's various flavors of Kubernetes cluster. We have rich support for a variety of flavors of Kubernetes, and we are looking forward to enabling the Kubernetes experience for you in most platforms. So once you have your Kubernetes infrastructure built, you as the database administrator or admin can connect to the Kubernetes cluster and build a data controller. This data controller is kind of the center of operations for the Arc-enabled data services experience. The data controller provides an API that you can connect to create your objects, but it also provides the monitoring and the logs. It leverages some open source projects to provide a rich and deep experience that scales well. It provides the automated backup type experience that Azure SQL Managed Instance has on premises. So if you have an Azure SQL Managed Instance, your backups are automatically taken care of as a service. With Azure Arc-enabled data services, you'll have that same experience on premises. In fact, you can also, it automatically will build an availability group if you configure it to do that, and it gives you high availability, and your availability is spread out across the physical nodes of your Kubernetes cluster. It's integrated with Arc so that you can manage all of the resources from the Azure Arc control plane. You can see them all in the portal if you want to. You can tag them so you can group your resources as you would any Azure resource. And then you can scale. And then we talked about provisioning. I talked about a CI/CD model where you can define all of your objects and check them into a Git repository, and the data controller will check the Git repository periodically and create your objects as you need them. So once you have the data controller built, you can create supported data services types. We support PostgreSQL Hyperscale, which is a flavor of Postgres that's optimized for Azure, and we support Azure SQL Managed Instance. So these workloads include some monitoring and log collecting solutions, FluentBit and CollectD, and they can be created by the Arc Data Controller, and you're doing all your interaction with the Arc Data Controller through either Azure Data Studio or through the AZ Data CLI. As you've built this thing, you've got all of the integration with Azure Arc, with the identity, the deployment and configuration. We've talked about backup and retention. These features are all enabled at that Arc Data Controller sitting on top of Kubernetes. That experience comes from Arc Data Controller. So your management experience on this whole environment can be done through the portal as well as through the Azure Data Studio or the CLI. And so you can experience it. You can also connect to your SQL Server resources with SQL Server Management Studio, of course. But the deployment and the integration with the Arc Data Controller is done through the Azure tools. In the future, there's potential for additional types of data services and analytics engine to be installed. And that's the direction we're going with Azure Arc-enabled data services. Once you've built this, I have my safety PowerPoint slide of an Arc-enabled data services resource group in Azure. We can take a look at that if we want to. We have, if we go out to the, let's start with a view of the portal, if I can find it real quick. Here we go. So here we're looking at my my Azure AKS cluster is hosting my data services. I have 4 instances of SQL Server. If I need another instance of SQL Server, I don't have CI/CD for continuous integration set up, but I do have the Azure Data Studio. My Azure Data Studio is connected to my controller. I have 5 instances of SQL Server. I have a requirement to get one more, so I can go through our dialog to select and create an instance of SQL Server. I can give it a little bit of information, and when I give it a little bit of information, it creates this notebook that will create my, go ahead and create my instance of SQL Server. We can let that run, and it will just quickly create an Azure SQL managed instance with a single node, just because that's what I spec'd out in this experience. But I've created it, I have it here. It is just an instance of SQL Server, so if I connect with managed instance, for example, or I'm sorry, with Management Studio, I can connect to Management Studio. I can see that I have one of my servers is configured for high availability, so it automatically creates an availability group. And I have, every time I create a database, the database is automatically enrolled. The listener is connected automatically by the data controller, so I can know how to connect to it. And it's just a few clicks and I've created the objects I needed. So that's kind of my, another set of tools that that we use is we use Grafana, so we can manage and monitor our instances of SQL Server that we're running if we want, so we can see what's going on. We can see that my secondary replica is a little bit sleepier than my primary replica, and we can get our common counters directly from the Grafana dashboard. So that kind of takes us around a little bit around the Azure Arc, the resource group that I had built kind of for it. So what do you get in the managed instance? Well, the managed instance is designed for Azure Arc to be current with the Azure SQL managed instance. You can control the patching so that we don't force updates on you. You can schedule that, but the feature set is equivalent to the Azure SQL managed instance. So you get most of the capabilities you get from a SQL Server in a PaaS offering, and the PaaS offering is a little bit different in this case. What's different is you get everything the same as far as the security, the scalability. You get high availability automated. You get automatic upgrade and patching. Will automatically back up and restore just like we do in the Azure PaaS offering. And your monitoring can be included in the Azure logs. And so you get all of that experience. Where it changes a little bit is we don't own the infrastructure. The infrastructure is your infrastructure. And because the infrastructure is your infrastructure, you're going to manage the compliance, and you're going to design your infrastructure so it meets your business SLA requirements. The nice thing about the Arc-enabled databases is they can be connected or not connected to the internet. So you can run these in a sovereign environment or in a cloud that's secure and not connected to the internet, if that's how you need to operate your Arc-enabled service. I'm here to help. Yeah. I'm not sure if Dinakar might have any comments to add at this point on what we're saying. I'm going to put Dinakar on the spot.
Hey, Mike, thanks for that. Just a quick intro. My name is Dinakar. I'm a PM on the Azure Data Services team. Don't have much to add. I think Mike covered it pretty well, but if you have any questions, I'm happy we can discuss about those.
Yeah, so that kind of concludes my presentation. I had way too much coffee, so I went too fast today. I don't even drink coffee. I don't know why I'm saying that. But that kind of wraps up. But I'm happy to listen to your questions, and whatever questions you ask, I will quickly forward over to Dinakar. I'm just kidding. You can let me take a swing the first time. But yeah, what questions do you have?
So somebody asked, I had a customer that asked Mike on a meeting this week. We're talking about Postgres deployment options, and we know Postgres is supported by Azure Arc-enabled data services, but I didn't have a real good answer on describing it conceptually. Does Azure Arc, go into your data center, to other cloud providers, to Azure? I mean, that's what I kind of stumbled around when I responded to the customer.
Yeah, that's a good question, Tim. Think of anything under Azure Arc as outside of Azure.
Yep.
Okay, so all these Azure Arc infrastructure services that Mike talked about, like the VMs, the SQL Server in a VM, the Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes, all of these services or resources are running outside of Azure, and you want to project them into Azure and manage them from Azure as if it's an Azure resource. But in reality, they are somewhere else. They could be on premises in some other cloud or some other public provider, but they're not in Azure. However, Azure Arc enables you to register those resources into Azure as an Azure resource.
Got it. Thanks.
So the question you asked about Postgres falls into the Azure PaaS, the Arc-enabled PaaS capabilities, or under Azure Arc Data Services. Today, we support two types of data engines. One is SQL Server. The other one is Postgres Hyperscale. So when you create this Kubernetes cluster, install the Arc Data Services on top of it, which allows the provisioning, deprovisioning, all these capabilities that are listed here. And then you create your Postgres Hyperscale instance, and it's a fully managed instance for you.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We had Doug ask, can we dive a little deeper with the SQL Server on-premises agent that is in public preview?
I think you're referring to the infrastructure type of service, Azure Arc enabled SQL Server. Is that correct, Doug?
Doug, you can come off mute or chat.
Yes.
Oh, you said
yeah. There's only like 10 people or less, so we can
Yeah.
keep this interactive.
Yeah, Doug,
Okay.
Doug said
yeah, that's right. So you think of the scenario as you have like an on-premises VM, or the VM is running in AWS or GCP or somewhere, and you have a SQL Server running in there. But now you want to manage that SQL Server from Azure. So you install this Arc agent that sits in the VM, and it projects that SQL instance as a resource into Azure, into your subscription resource group. And then once it shows up as a resource in your resource group, you can manage it from there. You can run SQL Server assessments. You can do Azure security, Azure policies. You can apply on that resource as if that resource is running in Azure.
Great, thank you so much.
Does that help? Yeah.
So George,
Yes, it does.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. So George asks, when you cross cloud SLAS products are different, can you troubleshoot failures quickly?
Yeah, that's a good point. So backing up on the architecture a little bit. So we are relying on the underlying Kubernetes to abstract the hardware that you're running on, right? The hardware can be on premises, GCP, AWS, or any of these public clouds, right? So for us, we are only talking to the Kube APIs. Because the infrastructure is owned by the customer, and we are providing, like we as in Microsoft is providing software to install and run and manage these SQL servers and Postgres instances, there is a sense of joint responsibility or shared responsibility with the customer. So like in this slide, you have these last two rows, right? Fully managed by Microsoft and guaranteed SLAs. So we cannot guarantee any SLA in this case because we don't have any control over this over the hardware. Whereas in Azure, we own the entire stack, right? From hardware, from the plumbing to the wires to the software, like the whole stack. So we are able to offer SLAs, honor them, and give credits if we miss those SLAs. But in the on-premises and the Arc world, it's a joint responsibility. So we give the software, but we cannot guarantee any SLAs. Does that answer your question, George?
Well, then while we're waiting for George to respond back, Hiram asked, do you see Arc expanding to web apps or other backend services besides just data services?
So I can
go ahead.
take this one. Yes. So, so actually, there's a rich set of services that are in the queue to get added to Arc, and And the first one was servers, and then Kubernetes just recently followed. We're kind of third in the chute for the public releases, and there's others coming. I think there's some that have been announced for preview already. I don't know off the top of my head. And I know web apps and other backend services are on that list.
Got it. We'll follow up.
So what does the agent, Hiram's asking, what does the agent run on? And are you talking about the data controller agent?
No, I think he's referring to the Arc-enabled SQL Server.
Oh, okay.
Is that right?
The Arc-enabled SQL Server agent.
Yeah, so under Arc, like we have two classes of offerings, right? There is the infrastructure class of offering, and then there is the PaaS class of offering. So in the PaaS, we have the Arc data services. We just talked about this. In the infrastructure offering, you have those further like three levels of or three types of products. You have the Arc-enabled servers, which covers the VMs. You have the Arc-enabled SQL Server, which covers the SQL Server in a VM. And the third one is Arc-enabled Kubernetes clusters. So I think you're referring to the Arc-enabled SQL Server, which has the agent. I don't know what language it is run in, Java or .NET, but it runs, it's a cross-platform agent, right? We cover all the Red Hat VMs, Windows VMs, Linux VMs. So yep. Yeah, this is the infrastructure view. Yep.
George Carlisle says, large firms need the SLAS. What customers would use this service if there are no service guarantees?
Yeah, I think I recognize that, like the team recognizes that. But again, the focus or the theme of Arc is to provide you the management capabilities, less on the perf. Again, the intended customers, the target customers today is customers that are already running their databases on premises. If their business warrants some sort of SLAs, the assumption is they're already meeting those SLAs today. So by giving this management capabilities, we are actually trying to make it easier for them to manage the SQL servers and Postgres servers. So the SLAs should continue to remain if they're using the same hardware that meets those SLAs. Yep.
Looks like we cleared all the questions, I think. Any other questions out there, folks? No?
I can add some more
Sure.
things to discuss while you can come up with questions. So we are in public preview today, trying to target GA pretty soon in the next few months, maybe. Just to highlight, if you can, Mike, if you can go back to that management capabilities slide. Yeah, this one. I just want to highlight that so you have your SQL Server on premises in that second column over there. And then you have your Azure services on the right. Like when you think of cloud providers, typically the assumption is that the cloud provider will take care of everything for me, from scalability to high availability to disaster recovery, provisioning, deprovisioning. I'm not bothered or concerned about how they do. I just care about the functionality they provide, right? So this Arc-enabled databases offering sits right in the middle of your on-premises world, where you as in the customer have complete control over this, and Azure, where you don't have control as much on what hardware it runs on, but you get these SLAs and guaranteed offerings, right? So we are right in that middle. So we are trying to bring those Azure capabilities on premises to where you are already running your workloads, right? Think of elasticity, right? Or scalability. You can scale up and down. For SQL Server, for Postgres Hyperscale, you can scale out and back in, right? HADR, we are going to provide automatic built-in high availability when you provision a SQL instance, right? You don't have to worry about setting up always on, trying to manage it, care and feed of it. The service will take care of that for you. Automatic upgrade and patching, right? Just like in Azure, you have Azure SQL MI, where you don't worry about what version it is running on. You just care about the compatibility. You just care that it doesn't break your application. All the service updates, security updates, patches, all taken care of with Microsoft. The same theme applies to Arc-enabled databases, right? We don't want to automatically apply all the security and upgrades, but customer has a choice to apply these security and upgrades at their own convenience and their own maintenance windows, right? Similarly, backup restore, like in on-premises, you either use third-party tools or set up agents to manage these backups, full differential log, whatever schedule you want, right? With the Arc-enabled data services, we are providing an automatic backup service. Think of the PITR or point-in-time restore service in Azure SQL MI, where you don't. The backup service is just a means to get to the end. The end is I want to be able to restore to whatever point in time I want to go to, right? So that's the capability we are bringing to this Arc-enabled data services. You set the recovery point objective and retention time, just like in MI, where I want to be able to restore back to 10 minutes, right? And I want to keep these backups for like 10 days or 20 days or 30 days, depending on my business requirements. I don't need to worry about, should I take a full backup today? Should I take a full backup tomorrow? Or how often should I take log backups? This service will calculate that for you based on the RPO settings you set, right? So this is all, this is part of that manageability benefits we are trying to bring on premises. Think of monitoring, like on premises, you have to, you're probably setting up your own scripts to monitor your SQL instances or using some third-party monitoring software. With Arc Data Services, you get built-in monitoring. There's a local Grafana Kibana dashboards you can just look up, and it has pretty much all the SQL Server monitoring metrics that you would normally care about, right? What else? You have data sovereignty. The data is sitting in your on-premises data center, so there's nothing to worry about privacy. And this has been a big ask from many of the customers where that work or that operate in countries where we don't have data centers, for example. Right? They can't move to the cloud because the data is not allowed to leave their geography. So this is a great fit for those kind of scenarios. Oh, I was just covering the data sovereignty. Yeah, so data sovereignty, again, if you want me to explain a little bit more, there are some countries in the world where the businesses that are running in those countries, or even little geographies within the countries, right? They're not allowed to send the data out of that geography. Even if there is even if Microsoft, Azure, or GCP or AWS have these security certifications, the 90 compliance certifications, that is still not sufficient for these companies to send the data out of those data centers. So that is where Arc Data Services helps. You can still continue to run in your data centers, but get the benefits of Azure.
Hey, George, I will get you a list of what
there's a public list
are available. I will post that. It's available. There's a link in the docs, but I'll get that for you. And it changes a little bit. There's an Arc site where you can look at it.
And a couple of other things that are not in this slide. One of the big advantages of Arc-enabled data services is the cloud model billing. Think of the current situation where you're running SQL Server on premises and you have these seasonal peaks and crests, right? You have some high usage in the holiday period, let's say from October through December, right? So you plan for that high peak usage. Every year you're trying to forecast your next year or this coming year's usage. You add some 10-20% buffer just for that unexpected surge in usage, right? And then you dedicate your capacity based on that high peak usage. And the rest of the year, that capacity is just sitting there and you're paying for licenses for all that capacity. With Arc-enabled data services, it's a cloud billing model, which means you only pay for what you use. And you also have scalability built in, which means you can scale up right before that surge of activity. You pay for what you use, and when that events or when that holiday season, whatever promotional activity you have, when that event is passed, you can scale back down to your previous level. And you only pay for that short amount of period of time where you have that high peak usage. So this greatly saves costs. What else? Serverless version, right? Again, on-premises world, you have SQL 2017, 2019, like every 3 or 4 years, we keep releasing these new versions, and enterprises want to stay on supported versions, right? So there is a migration cost. We have this standard journey, right? You have a 5 years mainstream support, and then you have the 5 years extended support. So the first 5 years is great, smooth, right? Mainstream support. Once you get into extended support, period, companies have to start planning for the next migration. It could be like midway, depending on how many hundreds or thousands of servers you have. It could be a multi-year project, right? You need a big team dedicated to work on this migration. It's a big undertaking. You have to plan for this, test it, and upgrade, and roll out the upgrades and phases. It's like easily a multi-year project, right? With Arc-enabled data services, it's a serverless version, as in there is no version, there's no end of life cycle, for example. You're always on the latest version, just like in MI. So that's another big cost saving, kind of hidden cost saving that companies don't realize.
Very nice. I like the questions are slowed down in the comment section.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer. My email address is in the slide, so feel free to ask any questions.
Yeah, in the slides, we also provide a few other links for experiences. One worth
nice.
checking out is this Jumpstart experience.
Yeah.
The Jumpstart lets you walks you through a few Arc-enabled scenarios so that you can test the features, you can experience the feature, you can see objects rendered in the Azure portal, and it really gives you a good experience to check kick the tires, as it were.
Yeah.
Hiram's asking for demo time, so we can look back at my my database and make sure it was made. So I kicked off a demo here where I ran this notebook. Oh, run cells failed. That's why I didn't come back to the demo.
So Mike, maybe it's a good time to at least back up a little bit and introduce the tool. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Azure Data Studio. I'm hoping most of you are familiar with SSMS at least, right? So the ADS or Azure Data Studio is our equivalent tool to SSMS. It's not fully one-to-one parity, but it's the modern tool. It's the new modern tool we are building. It's been out for a couple of years already. This is the cross-platform lightweight tool. It's based on VS Code, so it runs on other platforms as well. So this is our tool to use if you're talking to SQL servers running in like Azure and on-premises and different environments. Whereas SSMS was primarily built and designed for on-premises world like 15 years ago. It has a huge baggage to it. This is more of a VS Code world type of scenario. Yes, ADS is very lightweight tool. Here, this is more of a Visual Studio paradigm where you have extensions that you want to install. So there is an Arc extension that you install when you after you have ADS. The basic ADS doesn't have any of these extensions, right? There's admin packs, and there's Microsoft extensions that you can install. You can publish your own extensions, third party. You can write your own extension as well. So you use the ADS to connect to these Arc resources, right? Typically, there's a data controller. That's the control plane that you install on top of the Kubernetes cluster. And once you connect to the data controller, there's a dashboard view where it tells you what are the database engines that are installed on this. Mike has SQL Server instances, but if you have Postgres, you will see a Postgres instance also as one of the resources that was installed. Yeah, so you have the instances. You can connect to the instances. You can see the Azure subscription to which it is getting billed to. All the endpoints are available here. The Grafana Kibana dashboards are available here. They have the local metrics and logs, for example. What else? So yeah, Arc dashboard. Yep.
There we go. And then if I wanted to access my Grafana,
yep,
and see the state health of my instance.
All the CPUs and disk and memory, all the metrics are available here. And this is all built in, comes with the data controller, like free of cost.
So that's our ADS demo. One of the powerful things of Azure Data Studio is we provide notebooks for different experiences, and Jupyter Notebooks lets you demonstrate, lets you write something and then save it and rerun it. that's kind of out of the scope of this discussion. If the group is interested in a demonstration of notebooks and using notebooks with a SQL Server instance, I could talk to Tim about another time to do that.
Sure.
But
Guys are always welcome back.
we could do that. What else was I going to show here in the slides? Yeah, I would start with this. And I need to take one pass through the slide deck, and then I'll ship it over to Tim so that we can share it. I wrote some notes about what I think about Tim, but I need to cut those out.
Yeah, and you can use the ADS to deploy the data controller. You can use ADS to deploy your SQL Server instance on data controller, Postgres instance, and all of this. There's a hybrid category which can filter down to the type of resources. We have built in some intelligence into this wizard. It checks if you already have the required tools. We don't want to go all the way to the end and fail, right? You want to fail early. So it takes you through the nice step-by-step installation. We even try to read from your kubeconfig file and detect what clusters you have, what is your current cluster context, and we try to be more intuitive there. And in the end, you have an option to either directly deploy or even generate a notebook. Think of a notebook as the equivalent of SSMS. You have generate scripts. The notebook is a lot more richer than the scripts. Scripts is just a bunch of code, right? And notebooks is a lot more descriptive. It's rich text, right? And you can share this notebook. Like when you run this notebook, you have the cells with the code, then you have the cells with the description. Under each cell, when that cell runs, the results will be pasted right under the cell. And if there is an error, for example, you can take the notebook, save it as a IPYNB file, and send it to a colleague and troubleshoot for troubleshooting. And that colleague doesn't have to rerun those commands. They can actually see the command you ran and the results and also the error message all in the same book. So this is a great innovation. Yeah, notebooks are awesome. I love it. Yeah, so sample arc notebook, what you can do is you can go through the wizard, and at the end, when you get to that final screen, instead of hitting the deploy button, just hit the script to notebook, and you can see we run the same notebook. When you click the deploy, the same notebook is run behind the scenes. So there's no magic we do other than running those commands.
Yeah, so if I was to create a database, and what the database I created earlier, we don't want to create a data controller, so we go to the management screen. Let's go to our management screen here. If I wanted to create a new instance here, this should be the demo. And it just double checks to make sure that I have the correct set of tools. It has some context. I agree. I give it some basic parameters.
You might want to use a different instance name. You already have 1, 2, 3,
right.
4, 5.
Thanks. Let's do number 10. Thank you.
So I think you had a question here. Hiram had a question. If you switch a resource to private endpoint link, does Arc automatically reconnect? So when you provision these resources in Kubernetes, there are two ways you can provision them. There's a load balancer and there is a node port. If you want to stay private within the cluster, you can use the node port, but know that you can only connect to it from the particular node. But generally, you want to use load balancer, which gives you an IP address that you can connect to. And even if Kubernetes has to move your resource from one part to another, that IP address will still be valid.
George, I'm not sure if this is an example of an Arc notebook that you might look at. This notebook was one I created by just speccing out how I want it to build a server. And if I was to run this, then my data controller would receive the information and kick off an instance build for SQL Managed Instance using mostly default settings. Well, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to come. I am going to, I'll be available to forward other questions to Dinakar if you email me. And my primary role in our group is I'm either the content developer or the content developer. I help them write the documentation for ARC-enabled data services. And so if you have feedback on our documentation, I'm happy to hear it. If you have feedback on the product, I'll be happy to share that with Dinakar and his team. And I'm happy to wait for, I think George is still typing. I'm happy to hang out.
Yep, getting a bunch of thanks. As
right.
Hiram actually put hashtag best user group ever, so we appreciate that. Two awesome speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
I'm gonna go ahead and hit stop on the recording, and I'll get this posted up as soon as it processes.